Hello, everyone. I am Peter Cerda. I am the data curation specialist for big data and workflows at the Deep Blue Repositories and Research Data Services team at the University of Michigan Library. Um, so for today's talk, just going to give you all a brief introduction to DBIRDS, which is what we like to call ourselves because Deep Blue Repositories and Research Data Services is a very long title, and I run out of breath. So I'll give you all an introduction to DBIRDS as well as some of the U of M library services that we provide, and then go a little bit into some of the things that we can help researchers with, such as data management plan consultations, sharing data with Deep Blue data, and that would also include a live demo, just to show you it's not as terrifying as it might seem. And then also sharing with Deep Blue documents, like Victoria mentioned, that y'all might have a collection coming up with this with us. So I want to introduce you all to the team. So Joanna Thielen is our lead data curation specialist, as well as the specialist for science and engineering. Rachel Rodberg is the data curation specialist for humanities, social sciences, and medicine. So if you've ever deposited with us, most likely you've worked with Rachel. She takes all the health sciences data sets. There's myself, as I mentioned, the data specialist for workflows and big data. I do have the snake picture. As we were talking about earlier, I was a former snake biologist in my previous life. So have perspective on both the research side and also the data sharing side. And then our supervisor, Jeremy Morris, who's the director of DBIRDS as well as publishing technologies in Michigan Publishing. So Deep Blue repositories and research, DBIRDS, our big goal is to help everyone share the scholarship that's produced at U of M. That can be your data sets, that can be your papers, your posters, your conference papers, that pretty much anything that you produce, as well as anything your students produce. We would love to help you get out into the world. The areas of focus for DBIRDS really focus on depositing the data sets, the documents, helping you all do that, as well as helping folks discover them. So we are indexed by Google, but there are some other tricks that we use to try to maximize the discoverability of your scholarship. We also focus on access. We are open access repositories, so anyone in the world can access the data sets, the documents that you provide and deposit with us. And we do curation. And this is a little bit more focused on Deep Blue data, but we do help curate the data sets, try to maximize as many things as we can. I'll get a little bit more into detail about that in a bit. And ultimately, we preserve anything that's deposited in Deep Blue documents is going to be there in perpetuity. We do not go in and remove things. Deep Blue data, we do have a 10-year policy, and we're working on figuring out what that policy is because we're not 10 years old yet. So that we will figure that out when we get there. So I've talked a lot about research data, a little bit about research data, but what actually is it? Per U of M policy, research data means the recorded material commonly accepted in research communities as necessary or useful to validate, reconstruct, evaluate, replicate, or generate findings. So just because it has data in the name doesn't necessarily mean that it's just restricted to data because not every field calls their research products data. So it's a very open term, but it's basically anything that underlies the research and helps support your findings. So research data has this kind of own unique life cycle, right? So basically it starts off with, writing the proposal, hoping it gets funded. Once it does, you start up your project, and then we get into the data life cycle where there's data collection, data analysis. Sometimes you have to go back and collect some more data, do some more analysis. That can go on for a bit from experience. And then ultimately you get to the point where you're about to publish it. You want to share your data that goes along with the publication. Then it's the end of project, and you deposit the data, you deposit the paper, and that lives in a data archive until it's found and reused. So, from my own experience, I've built some of my projects off of others' data. So, building or doing that data discovery helps underlie some of the major things that we're doing. And we at DBERS can help you out in 3 different locations on this data lifecycle. So we have the research data management and sharing plan consultations that we can do during the proposal writing or planning and writing stage. We help you share the data and then help you share the publications and other things that are associated with it, the scholarship. So I'm going to go into the 3 different areas, starting off with the research data management and sharing plan. So with how we can help y'all with this step is basically helping y'all write the plan. So we do have some boilerplate language about using Deep Blue data as your repository of record on your grants. That goes into some of the specifications that you might need for the grant. But we can also help you write um, the sharing aspect, but also the data management part. We can talk with y'all while you go through, and we usually point folks to dmptool.org if you haven't heard of it. It's a very useful tool that where you can like build templates and use some template language to develop your management plan. And of course, we can help you implement the plan after the award, not just with the sharing aspect. We are happy to talk about data management just in general um, with you all as you go through the process. And I do really like to point out that this can be used, the DMP tool and these templates can be used for your research group. I'm not sure how many of y'all have had someone leave the lab and then a year or two later, you realize they had all the data and all the information for a project that you just remembered about. And trying to find it and then also trying to understand it can be a pain. Like I've had to do this with freezers where everyone is left and I'm the only one trying to find this one vial and there's no guidance, right? So that's a nightmare. My fingertips can attest to that. So you want to make sure that your lab group has some sort of plan for how you're going to manage the data. When we can help you all with that. Because ultimately what it's going to come down to is like sharing, either sharing it publicly or sharing it with the lab members or the group that you're working with is easier when you do it ahead of time instead of like being proactive about it rather than be reactive and realizing you got to organize folders and, terabytes of data or files, things like that. So the next step is helping y'all share your data. And this is where Deep Blue Data comes into play. This is our institutional data repository funded by U of M, free to use to anyone that's at U of M. We don't really have size limits. If it's a few terabytes, we're going to have a conversation, but otherwise we can take pretty much anything. Speaking of which, what can you deposit? What you can deposit is your finalized raw or processed data. We're happy to take both. We've seen there's a lot of interest in classes using raw data so that their students can learn how to work with actual data and do analysis with that. We also take code. I should have mentioned I'm also the reproducibility specialist. So if you have code in your data set, I'll be working with you to make sure um, you can replicate it and I can run it on my machine. Hopefully that means others can run it on theirs. We take media. We're currently in the process of uploading CT images of a bunch of museums of zoology specimens. We take videos. There's a documentaries of an endangered language in Africa that we've been hosting. So we can take a lot of stuff. We can take de-identified data as well as big data with the use of Globus. Now, a little bit more relevant to y'all's field, being in the health sciences, is unfortunately we are unable to take sensitive data. We just do not have the capability. As I mentioned earlier, we are completely open access. We do not do restricted access to data sets. So we can take sensitive data, personally identifiable data, protected health information. We can't take those types of data sets. So during the process, we can help you prepare your data to be shareable, such as describing your data through documentation. I'm not sure how many of you all have tried to find supplemental material from papers and you download it and have no idea what is in there. We help you try to avoid that with your data sets, as well as metadata, trying to describe your data set so that you don't always have to refer someone back to the paper to get the full picture. If they have some metadata that describes the data set, outside of that, that helps to make the data set a little more usable. And all of this is with the idea that we want to develop fair data. And by fair, I mean findable. Can you find it? Can you find it on Google? Is there DOIs associated within the papers? Things like that. Is it accessible? Can you download it? Can you open it? Is it in open source software or is it in proprietary software? Is it accessible to everyone? And by that, I mean, like, for example, we often open Excel files just to make sure they're not color coding their cells. And if they are they color coding it red, green? Because that's going to pose a problem to colorblind folk, right? So we want to make sure it's accessible, not just can you open it, but can you actually use it? And can everyone use it? So we try to take that perspective with it. Is it interoperable? Can it go from a Mac to a Windows? Is there enough documentation to help someone understand what changes might need to be made? And ultimately, is it reusable, right? Can you actually open it? Can you reuse it? Um, so Deep Blue Data services all disciplines. Once you deposit a data set, we do a curation review of the data. So we review your metadata, we review your documentation, and your data files. And all of this is really just a way to help make that data set more accessible because we're coming in with the perspective that we're not the experts, but hopefully we can make sense of your data set with the documentation you provide. And that's really our goal is to increase the documentation, increase the metadata quality, so that way folks can actually use it, right? We do also help with licensing considerations. What type of license do you want to associate or have your data set fall under? We do provide a DOI for all data sets, and that's going to live forever. But if like down the road you realize that there's a more specialized repository that your data set fits better in, we will help you do that. We will help you submit to that data repository. So for example, like if we receive a data set that's full of nucleotide sequences, I already know that folks are not going to come to Deep Blue Data to find those sequences. They're going to go to GenBank, NCBI GenBank to find those sequences. The data set is better serviced at that repository. So we would help them do that, help them go there. We like to say that we're not in competition with any repository. We all have the same goals of making data accessible to everyone. So if there's something that's better for you, we're not going to be greedy and try to get you to deposit with us. Go where the data is going to be more likely to be found, right? And I just wanted to show this graph of like our growth over time from our humble beginnings in 2016 to now having over 1,500 data sets deposited just last month. So we've grown quite a bit, and a lot of this is the return on projects that we've been long invested in. So, for example, I mentioned the CT scans from the Museum of Zoology. That's responsible for over 300 data sets that we've published with them. So there's a lot of growth coming our way. So I just also wanted to provide some context and rationale for the data sharing, right? So this paper here suggests that sharing data results in increased citations for the paper. Because good data or good research really does rely on like transparency and openness, and which results in trust, right? You want to trust the results, you want to trust the data that underlie that. There is also a push in the data sharing world for increased data citations. Because one, it shows it's another value for the scholarship that you produce, right? So if we can push for data citations to be included in, the reference section of your paper, that's something that you can add to your CV to show the product of your work, the quality of your work. And and I'll be honest with you, sometimes the drawing requirements are not enough. We do find that many researchers are not complying with their published data sharing statements. So there are quite a few times, or many times, where authors say their data is available upon request. It probably isn't, which is not great for reproducibility reasons, for trust in the data. I've definitely had that where I've reached out to someone and never heard back. I wish I had shared my data more openly because now I'm fielding these requests and I try to get back to them as quickly as I can, but it's an extra email and that's unfortunately going to cause a delay in the scholarship from someone else, right? So um, we want to share the data so that um, we can avoid that. And ultimately, it's becoming required by funders, by funding agencies, by publishers. I'm sure you all know about the NIH policies. This next slide has the U of M research data stewardship policy, which came out, I believe, I believe came out in January of this year, where PIs should strive to make their research data publicly available when possible. And when possible, of course, is pertaining to like sensitive data. You shouldn't share that. Um, but research data supporting publications and our scholarly output should be made immediately available at the time of publication. And U of M is actually really pushing for these data to be fair. And I've linked to the SPG here for further reading. But we're starting to see these top-down requirements from funders, from journals, from universities, and U of M is not unique in this. A lot of universities are starting to come out with these policies. So the expectation is starting to change towards sharing data. Um, Now I do have a live demo of Deep Blue, but I would love to pause for any questions that y'all might have before we get too far away from them. All right. So I will switch out of this and my Zoom thing will not move. There we go. Okay. So for Deep Blue data, you can go to deepblue.lib.umich.edu/data. I've logged in as Gabriel, just so you can see it without all the scary tabs that I have on my view. So once you get to Deep Blue data, there will be a login button over here. You should be able to log in. Everyone should be able to access it and have the necessary privileges to deposit. It's very simple as clicking deposit your work. And it's going to give you this metadata field for you to fill it out. So it says title. We typically ask for if it's associated with the paper, we have like a data for the paper or data set for paper and the title of the paper. That helps, with findability, things like that. Of course, add the creator and contact information. This is similar to the contributing author or corresponding author on papers, right? So there'll be the contact information for the person that's ultimately responsible for answering the questions related to it. We do ask for a brief methodology section. This is really just 3 or 4 sentences that are relating to how the data were collected and processed. We ask that it not be the entire method section because we have gotten that before, and we try to keep it as less technical as possible with still enough to understand the what happened. In this case, I'm just going to put test just to move on. And then we do have a description section. And this is really about the research that the data set underlies. What was the reason that this data set was created? As well as asking if there's any specific software or scripts that you need to access this data. It will be a good place to describe this as well. We typically try to think of this as like similar to the abstract for a paper, but rather for it being the abstract for the paper, it'd be the abstract for the data set. And then we have a few other fields such as, date coverage. So let's say this is a time series study. So you can have it go from March 2021 to, I don't know, February or March 2024. Right. So that way you give some metadata about how long this data set was being collected and analyzed for. Obviously licensing, we can talk more about that. The type of discipline that you're in, funding agency, OSRP grant numbers, keywords, like I mentioned earlier. Keywords are great for helping expand the discoverability of your data set. Typically, we ask for 4 or 5, and that the terms not be in your title, because then it's redundant. You're not increasing your discoverability. Finally, just language, citation to related materials. This is where you would put your current citation for your work, that let's say your paper or something like that. And of course, if you have any questions, we do have a guide to the metadata linked here. Next, we'll just actually upload some files. So I mentioned that I was the data curation specialist for big data. And basically, if your data set has over 100 files or files larger than 5 gigabytes, you would want to contact me because we have to do something else to actually get these data uploaded to your deposit. If it's something simple like CSV files and it's less than 4 gigs, you can directly upload it. So I'm going to upload that graph I showed you earlier about Deep Blue's growth over time. And then, oh, error, that's not great. Hopefully that's not long-term. So you have 2 options once you're done here. If you're just building it now and want to add more files later, you can save as a draft and come back to it. When you click submit for review, that's going to send an email to us. It's going to generate a ticket in Team Dynamics, and then we'll start working with you, providing that data curation review, as well as providing recommendations for your documentation. In this case, there's no documentation, so the first thing is going to be, hey, can you give us documentation? We can't move forward without that. Documentation is a requirement to deposit with us. Yeah, and then once it's live, it's live. Oops. Okay, I think Deep Blue's down. Great time. Well, good thing I was at the end of my live demo, so I'm going to switch back now. Okay. So now that we've gone through how to deposit, you shared your data set. Let's say there's publications that you want to share, or posters for conferences that you want to have available. That's where Deep Blue Documents comes into play. And this is where this is our other institutional repository. This is more towards human readable formats such as articles, books, chapters, presentations, posters, media, syllabi, you name it, you can put it in here really. But it's meant to be the product of your research or of teaching. We do have all of U of M's dissertations are on Deep Blue. Most of them are openly accessible. We do host honors theses, master's theses. We do have a direct connection with Michigan experts, so you can actually deposit directly through Michigan experts into Deep Blue and never have to use Deep Blue's interface. So that's another possibility as well. So ultimately, we want to help you share your documents. Faculty and staff can add to existing collections, or they can request collection access, or the generation of new collections, like we're working with Victoria and Gabrielle to create one for the metric symposium. Students can deposit with faculty approval. That's mostly just to give the students a little bit of protection in case they're not supposed to upload something. And it is publicly available online immediately. As soon as you click deposit, it is up. You have a DOI waiting for you when it's up. So like I mentioned, this is fantastic for students. I'm not sure if many of you interact with students, but it's fantastic for them. They have something that demonstrates the work that they've done, especially if they're applying to graduate school or for postdocs. So having that DOI and being able to show your work, I think is fantastic, regardless of what stage you're at. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask or reach out to us at deepblue@umich.edu. Here are the two links to our two repositories. I've shared the slides in the chat, so please feel free to view those when necessary. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you,
Okay.
Peter.
Yeah.
I actually have a couple of questions, but I want to allow others to ask first.
Right. So we do have a question in the chat from Jamie. Would Deep Blue for sharing documents be very similar then to archive? What would the main difference between the two be? So they're essentially the same. Yeah, we can act as a preprint repository as well. I think archive is a little bit more well known. So, and might have some integrations with some journals. So that's definitely an avenue. Yeah, from what I can tell, there's no real difference between that. I think you probably had to be a little more proactive about reaching out to us to give an updated link once the paper is actually published. So that way we can refer folks to that paper as the finalized product, which we are more than happy to do. But I think that might be the only thing.
Another
Okay.
question, do
Yeah.
researchers typically submit row level data or aggregate results from their research?
All of the above. Yeah, we can host any. It's really what researchers want to put in, and what their analysis really needs. Yeah, we are happy to take both. Yeah, yeah. So it's I'm not sure if I can say which one is more common, but yeah, we've easily dealt with both, and it's no real big issue on our end. So there's another question from Gabriel. Are documents data deposits linked to each author's ORCID? Is there a place to provide ORCID IDs when depositing? Right. So we do have a integration with ORCID on Deep Blue data. We're still working out the kinks for that. Right now, it only displays the creator's ORCID, which you can associate with your profile in your profile or in the profile tab of Deep Blue data. For documents, the ORCID ID is a text field, so it's not completely integrated, but you can display those IDs. So we're still working out the kinks of some of that process, but it took a long time for us to get that because ORCID's integration requires quite a bit of testing from both your end and ORCID. But
I'm trying to take notes and also, okay. I have a question. So do you also encourage the sharing of the code that's used to process or clean the data? And
yeah,
how is that like, how does that show up in the repository?
right. That's a fantastic question. So we would love to have that. Um, right, we would happily take anything that you provide, because again, you're the ones that are producing the data. You know what's most important. Especially if you're providing the processed or the raw and the processed, we would love to have that code associated with it. How it looks for us on our end, it's not going to be like a GitHub where you can go in and view the file individually. Rather, you have to download it. For that, like as the reproducibility specialist, I would try to run it if it didn't require a core, if I could run it on my computer, just to make sure the reproducibility is possible. Like one thing that I see a lot is, especially in processing code, is the file directories are not relative, they're absolute. So then we have a lot of personal files or folders and directories that obviously cause an error when I try to run it out the box. But that's something that we're looking for, just to make sure that it's either they can note it if that's an issue in, 300 files, I'm not going to ask them to go in and change that in all 300 files, but rather note that in the documentation that if you're going to run X script, you should change the path. So that's kind of what it looks like, especially if it's a processed if it's a processing code, we would then also want, the code the data files that the code uses. Just as a validation. It's not requirement, of course. If you just want that code to be out there as like a product, it's not we're not requiring. It would be nicer if you did have that, but we also understand that there's limitations.
There's another question in the comments.
Yeah. Okay, from Jamie, I've worked with very large research teams involving several universities, but sometimes the folks who collect the data are from another university. In this situation, it seems to make more sense for the depositor to be the folks who collected the data, even if a UMich team may be involved in data cleaning and analysis. As to who may deposit data in Deep Blues, would the main depositor be limited to faculty, staff, or students, or may collaborators be from other universities, may collaborators from other universities take the lead in depositing in Deep Blue? That is a fantastic question. So it's something we've thought a lot about. We're in the process of developing some language where we might be able to facilitate this, but it's not rolled out yet. So at this point, it would be the person depositing would have to be at U of M. And I believe, yeah, I do think the person collecting the data would probably have the most responsibility for where it gets deposited. But that's a conversation amongst the research team. So if everyone's in agreement that the UMich folks should deposit the data in Deep Blue, we're happy to do that. Yeah, we're happy to come in where it makes sense, but we don't want to dictate also who can do what for research groups.
And do you recommend that investigators have a consultation before they attempt depositing data?
I think that's always nice because it helps to alleviate some of the common issues we might see, such as like documentation quality. But it's not required. Yeah, especially if it's a long-term project that there might be several deposits coming from, then a consultation would be best just so we make sure we can get it all appropriately organized. We do have the ability to create collections, so basically a group of data sets that are related to each other. We do have that ability, so knowing ahead of time would make that organization a lot easier. But by no means is it a requirement. These are things that will come up in conversation. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Great. Well, thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Peter.